Well, good morning, everybody. I had a strange morning this morning. I normally don't hit snooze, and this morning I did, and I paid for it because as I kind of rolled back over and fell asleep, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I went instantly into a dream, and I had a dream that a major frost was coming in the next 7 days. I don't know if it was just because it was a chillier night finally, and my body was just thinking about it, but I ran downstairs, still kind of half in a dream state as I woke back up. And I just went straight to this map. And so there's very good news. According to the forecast data, we do not have a frost. That's why the map is blank. But I was just concerned about, there's going to be some cool air that's coming into this section of the country where a lot of heat builds in the west, specifically in the northwest and into the western side of Canada. So good thing is nightmare over, and I don't have any sort of crazy early frost in the forecast. Now, we do have some chilly temperatures coming, so let's just start off talking about that today. These were this morning's minimum temperatures, and you're going to watch the eastern half of the country drop some pretty cool air in place. Now, that's all going to happen while the west experiences a pretty sizable heat wave that's going to come through. And that has been something the west has resisted for most of this, most of this summer. They have had heat, there's no doubt about it, but it's not coming persistent month-long excessively hot conditions. I say all that, and then I want to remind you that does not apply to Arizona. We've been extremely hot into Arizona the entire summer and surrounding areas down here. But take a look at the chilly air that we're going to have by Sunday morning, getting into Monday morning here, while the overnight lows are well into the 60s and 70s in the northwest. Still some warmer conditions hanging on in the northeast as we get into early Monday morning, but we got some 40s that are coming through here. And I wouldn't be surprised, just because this typically happens, that the models end up showing you these numbers down around 42, 43, and you can get a few low-lying areas if the skies clear out and we get light winds that drop down, several degrees below this. Now, not 10 degrees below this, but possibly, I can't rule it out, there might be a high 30 temperature reading. And I have a few spots I seem to always see this happening. Here is one, right in this part of Wisconsin. I think it's induced by topography. That, of course, is the driftless zone. And then we often find this area here, a very high elevation, not very well, I think, represented in the models. So just a couple things to point out. That's Monday morning's lows. Let's go to Tuesday morning. Colder air continues to dive while the west stays hot. This is Wednesday morning into next Thursday. So there's a sizable shift in the in the temperature pattern that we've been talking about, but I just wanted to kind of give you the end result of this. But here's what's very interesting to me about this pattern. We have watched some of our models really want to block it up. Can you almost see the omega pattern here? Look at this. And that kind of setup tends to be one that gets stuck, meaning that the cooler, drier air that's coming in around repeated low pressure systems that want to just form in this area will just bring drier shots of air behind them now. So northwest flow right now does not mean storms. Okay, that whole time period is over. And the amount of heat that's coming into the western side of Canada and the Pacific Northwest and parts of the western United States is going to be substantial. But can we get some of these lows to eventually break through? That's going to be the bigger question as we go forward. And some of the trough that you see here coming through Europe is being aided by the remnants of Erin, which made its brush against the East Coast yesterday. It's going to continue to go up here and spin into a deep synoptic scale low that is expected to move across Europe. And I'll show you that in just a few moments here. So current temperature is about 550 this morning, and I'm recording. Thank goodness that was a nightmare and not reality. But finally, nice to see some of the temperatures not in the 70s for overnight lows in this area. Still very hot south, extremely hot in the southwest, which is, of course, not uncommon. But if you remember watching earlier this week, we've got places in here that have had 25 to 35. I'm talking about the Ohio Valley. 25 to 35 additional days compared to average where the minimum temperature was over 70 degrees. So that is going to be a continued point for the crops grown in this area that I think some of that stress is going to show up as we start to see some of these national yield estimates come out for those crops grown there. Okay, yesterday, there's Erin just off the coast. It is a very sizable storm overall. This symmetry is starting to slowly break apart, which is expected as it encounters a bit more wind shear. We again had storms that kind of lined the Gulf Coast. There's this decaying, weaker frontal boundary moving down here. We do need rain in this area. This is a drier spot in the country, so it's good to get some rain there. And then I noted as we got later in the day, some very large storms did pop up in parts of the upper Midwest, northern plains, while our monsoonal circulation was showing up. And again, it's hyper local, but we do have some monsoonal storms happening down in the southwest, which has been a very difficult thing to get the atmosphere to do. At the end of this, as the sun is setting, though, we can see the wildfire smoke that is coming out of parts of Idaho, spreading across Montana, getting here all the way to North Dakota, which, again, this has been a summer of smoke in this particular region of the country, both from Canada and the wildfire smoke from the west. But just take note. I mean, that is, that is one form of southwestern monsoonal flow that you see down here curling around the broader ridge in the upper atmosphere. So I just wanted to point a couple of those things out. Over the last 24 hours, I did need to note that some of these storms put down some more hail. This has been a region that's been hit repeatedly. We've had derecho-like winds. We've had multiple large hailstone storm events. And the eastern side of the state has been hit repeatedly with very, very heavy rain. So I'll be quite curious to see what some of the crop estimates come out of South Dakota specifically look like, given the amount of severe weather and also just the kind of the full range of weather that's happened in that particular spot. But over the last 48 hours, this has kind of been the story. We've had some better rains coming through the Canadian Prairie and farther north. You can almost see, if you look here, you can almost see the circulation around the southwestern monsoon. The air front has finally sagged here, so we're still getting the deeper convection and the very humid air to the south, and that, of course, is Aaron. Loved every bit of the rain in the last couple of days that's moved through the northeastern United States, given how dry that particular region has been as of late. But over the last 7 days, as I look at the map, I start to see more of the reds than I do the blues, representing that this pattern has gone over a bit drier. And by the way, thank you for all of you that have filled out the survey on agweather.com. We will be putting these maps, just based on your requests, onto a tile server so that you can, especially our precipitation maps, you can zoom in and out and get much more local information rather than the standard projections that I typically use. So we'll get that to you. But I want to look back over the last 30 days. Because I think this is going to inform more of the drought monitor adjustments that we've seen. So as I said, this is not the typical southwest monsoon we can get. And while there's been some scattered storms here and better rainfall in New Mexico, so there are times when the monsoonal flow is much, much better that this is, we get a whole lot more of this color. All right. We hear more stories about flash flooding in the southwest. But over the last 30 days, there are numerous locations that are down here in parts of the Mid-South, stretching all the way into the southern plains, coming down through the Delta, extending into Kentucky, southern Indiana, Ohio, and then getting into the Northeast, including parts of the Mid-Atlantic that have been extremely dry. And that is where we continue to see the degradation on the drought monitor. And this is the latest update. And so I think this area is a bit more expansive than currently being shown, but understand something, to see the adjustments on the drought monitor, this takes recommendations from all of these climate districts in order to have that go on there. So what's confusing about this is that you've got spots in here. I mean, let's just do this real quick. This is the new website we're about ready to release. But if you come in here, let's just zoom in and grab Memphis just as an example. Now, I'm still working on some of these, the data here, but right now in Memphis, they've had 46.56 inches of rain. That's 12.56 inches above the historical average. But I'm going to scroll relatively quickly here. Let's get down to the bottom. This is the way it's been delivered, right? We had all of this rain in April that just shot them up. That right there was the 12 inches. That was a foot of rain. We had some heavy rains later in May and also in June. But then look how we just kind of flatlined here overall. And the forecast is bone dry in this area. You don't see anything showing up in the next 15 days in that pocket. I don't think that's true. I think you will get some precipitation in that area. But the point is to say that the drought that has resulted at the end of this season is masked by the longer-term statistics. In other words, the beginning of the year being so wet. Let's also go ahead and have a look at the change maps. If we go back here just over the last month, you can see there's a 2-class degradation there. We've been degrading in parts of the Western Mountains. And again, Matt made this point that we typically get another surge of moisture this time of year in this area. So to see drought settling in, it's just part of that Western water picture. Mainly the snow late in the season getting into the wintertime is the most important thing for the West. But I do want to point that out as we look at this drought change map. Okay, I was thinking about why. What's been going on here in this month of August and what's going to change. And the most dominant feature, honestly, has been the repeated areas of high pressure that have come into this part of Canada. So this would be Quebec and the Northeast. And the low pressure you see here has been primarily from our tropical systems. We've seen storm systems run over the top of this, but as the high pressure curls around, we've been drier in this region. So that's the pressure pattern, and this is about to get knocked out in a big way. That is done, all right? But look at what it's done to the anomalous low-level wind field. You see, we've seen more flow anomalously, okay, so this is compared to average, doing this. And that's been driving drier conditions into this area because it's coming off the Appalachian Mountains, going across, this part of Tennessee, northern Alabama, Mississippi, and getting into this mid-south delta region and just not fully pulling up that moisture from the south. And meanwhile, we've had stronger flow like this, but it's made the turn. There's another high-pressure cell sitting here, the Pacific high, that's been influencing the west. So when you look at just the composite wind, not the anomaly, this is what we get. For months, I mean, going back to April up until, I think, the beginning of August, this area here, of flow coming out of the Caribbean and Gulf was much more expansive, right? We saw so much more widespread southerly flow just driving moisture into the United States out of the south. And that's been gone. That's been whittled away into a tiny little corridor here. And it's pulling a little bit too much on some drier air that's further inland, which is why we've not been able to get just the consistently, heavy rains and big storms as of late as things kind of slow down a little bit. That Pacific Ridge, though, this was an interesting one to study all summer. We have had summers where this thing just parks itself in the west, and we just talk about weeks upon weeks of excessive heat. But it's lived just off the coast. It's caused the upwelling in the ocean temperature, which is why it's been cold off the coast. It's pushed the marine stratocumulus layer in further inland, which has driven those cold temperatures along the west coast. But that still is a drier signal overall. So this is what it looks like, okay? Since the beginning of the month, what has our precipitable water values look like? The biggest change is here. For months, April, May, June, July, this was a deep shade of red, meaning that we had just abundant amount of moisture in this area. And now we can see that it has been drier in this new month. So let's think about all of that change, and just I'm going to show you what's going to happen here. I like going back to this precipitable water map because it's going to show us the motion of the atmosphere and also where the humidity is. So we know we were already watching these big storms here. Oops, sorry about that. Last night, which is what this is capturing, okay? And as we play it forward here, watch the low curl its way up into Ontario, going through Quebec, driving that drier air farther and farther to the south, pushing the moist air farther and farther to the south as Aaron exits, off into the right-hand side of this image. And as we just go out, this is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, there's a big push of drier air that really starts in Canada, goes into Montana, drips across, the northern plains and just goes all the way into the northeast. And that is going to set this region up to deal with the tail end of a boundary, keeping it very wet and stormy in this pocket. Now, as that goes forward, this is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. You're like, oh, look, a push of moisture. Maybe you'll get a little bit out of this. But I think that our biggest story is going to be here for wetter weather over the next 7 to 10 days in total. Now, playing it out there into the next weekend, this is August 30th, I see just persistent dry air in this region while the southern plains tends to get a bit more action. And these low-pressure centers that are off the coast, they just don't seem to be able to drive themselves all the way to the northwest coast. And that's because, you saw it a moment ago, there's kind of this omega block to the setup, and that's what's going to keep things, I think, overall in place. So let's look at it a couple different ways. Let's go to precipitation anomalies. I'm just going to take this all the way out to the next 10 days so you can see it. So note, these are not making it to the northwest coast. We have the lows that come curling up here but drive the drier air farther to the south. The frontal boundary lingers in this area. So we storm here. There's your southwest monsoon, but a lot of dry air is coming through this section of the country. And with it, the cooler weather, which we've been talking about. But if you want to look at the total precipitation values, let's just run the European model out to see it. So this includes last night's storms, just to be clear, okay? And as we go forward, I still see, scattered storms, Georgia, South Carolina, wetter conditions here, better chances of rain in the northeast as the fronts come through. They need this rain big time in this area. But as I just play it forward, look at this next Monday, Tuesday, Colorado, Texas, parts of northern Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. We've got a pocket in through here. We just need to be very well aware that could be very wet in this particular setup, while the southwestern monsoon storms seem to have a pretty good life. And as we go out just 10 days, I'm going to have to watch this part of the southern Rockies getting into the high and western plains for the potential for some very heavy rainfall. while we see just a stripe in through here of almost nothing, and that includes parts of the mid-Atlantic and East Coast. So I think that's going to be the big story going forward as this pattern sets up, because over the next 7 days, the color shading on this map represents the chance it's staying under 1/10 of an inch. So it's very dry where you see these dark reds. Got those 3 spots, 1, 2, 3. In coastal California, this region, it's common to see it still be dry at this point in late August. Now, I'm probably going to get a new model run in. Yep. And let's go back and go to the 0Z. This is who's going to be wetter over the next 10 days. That is the probability of an inch. So now you see where the lows are curling up. You can see where the frontal boundary squishes down and where it lingers here, helping initiate storms on the remaining moisture in that area. That is the story, I think, as we go forward. All right, week 2. Interesting change between the models. See, the Climate Prediction Center, the European model, and the GFS all have very similar looks. They're trying to move the omega block farther to the east, which is going to introduce better chances of rain in the northwest. See that? We still have, because this is mostly next week's rainfall, you can see it still showing up here. But the AI model is trying to push this back into the Midwest. And I'll be honest, while I love the AI model, I like looking at it, it's very different from the other forecasts, which try to hang on to drier conditions as you approach the Great Lakes longer. Now, for the crops in this area, yes, we would love to see just a drink in early September would be huge for the crop yields in this spot. But I want you to be very skeptical of that coming through, and we'll have to watch the AI model's performance at that time frame to see if this does materialize. Now, you'll notice we haven't talked much about the tropics, and one of the big reasons is the next few systems, like the one that's following Aaron, it's going to respond to where the Bermuda High is and just take off. Plus, remember, there's the fronts. These are like blockades against getting systems to come into the eastern United States. I will mention this, though, and while it's not happening, I want you to understand, later in September and October, sometimes these fronts stop here, and you get convection that just pops up. We can get these homegrown systems on the decaying edges of old fronts. Not this time, though. It's not going to work that way. So most of the systems are out and moving. And the system following we were worried about last week, most of the model simulations show you that where that one is, right here, watch it reset, it's going to go to the north as well. All right. There's a little bit of something forming off the Carolina coast, but it goes away from the Carolina coast right there, which is going to be over the weekend into early next week. So nothing overall to be concerned about with this pattern. I do want to show you, though, Aaron is going to cause some problems in the North Atlantic Ocean. And we can see the remnants of Aaron as predicted by the ensemble spread in the forecast of where Aaron's center is going to go, that there's high probability that this curls up somewhere south of Iceland over toward, this side of Europe. And I was looking at the forecast, and by the time you get out there to Tuesday, this is early in the morning on Tuesday, this is a 964 low that's going to be coming across. And with it, it's going to be bringing rain. Look at this go right to the south of Ireland and then into France, which remember was deep in drought earlier this summer. And so I'm just rocking back and forth over Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week. And the total amount of precipitation could be high from this, just to kind of get a good glimpse at it. This is what we're expecting to come through. And that could be some heavy rains and probably some very high alpine snows in the Alps here. But it's going to be the winds with this, which I think are going to have to be paid close attention to, because very strong wind field coming through here with wind gusts, at times probably getting up to 70 to maybe 90 kph as it comes through. So just be aware of that system if you're watching me this morning from some spot in Europe. But while we're going to keep an eye on that, I'm going to tell you this is the time of year where, get yourself oriented on the map here, but this is the time of year where we have to think about the West Pacific. So we have a system going over the Philippines. What we're watching for any time of year this year is a system that forms and curls and gets up here into the North Pacific. That will be the ones that disrupt the flow. These are the types of systems that do that surprise snowfall event in October, or they make the big frost event in the eastern half of the country in early October. That is a long ways away from now. This forecast map only goes out to September 1st. And again, what you're looking at is the probability of development of a system. But I want to tell you, you're probably going to hear us talk a whole lot more about that part of the world, and tropical development going on out there. All right, let's come back to temperatures. I showed you min temperatures early. Here's high temperatures. We have excessive heat watches and warnings and heat advisories up the West Coast today with these extremely hot temperatures. But that colder air coming into the central U.S., Saturday, Highs in the upper 60s here. Getting into Sunday, look at that. Holy cow. I mean, the Willamette Valley, the Columbia Basin, Yakima at 100 degrees here. Very, very hot conditions out west, but much colder in the eastern 2/3 of the U.S. That's Tuesday. Holy cow. It's going to be rain. There's going to be cloud cover and rain here, but in the 60s. And by the way, this rain is desperately needed for the winter wheat belt. We get the weed pressure to come up after this rain. It's perfectly timed for when we want to let those weeds grow. So when we can destroy them and then put in the wheat crop afterward and not have the wheat pressure competing against. And that's how we get out to next Thursday. Bigger picture, how long does it last? Well, blocks tend to get stuck, right? That's your next 5 days. That's day 5 through 10. Can you see it? There it is. That's what we're looking at here in this pattern. And then out there beyond that, this is day 5 through 10. This is day 10 through 15, which is basically the beginning of September, first 5 days of September right there. Now, these long-range models want to do this, right? So this is the next 7 days. And this is day 7 through 14. And then watch. They're like, after that, September, just make it warm. But I want to tell you about the fault in these models, okay? I'm going to go back here all the way to a run that was on 8/8. And we're going to see what it predicted for the time period we're in right now, which would be, there it is. That was the prediction from earlier in August by one of our best global models for the week we're in right now. And you know that it doesn't look anything like this. We have a massive Arctic, forgive me, we have a big cold shot coming through and all the heat's going here. And so this has been a terrible summer for the performance of these models. Absolutely terrible. And so therefore I could show you them all day long and hey, let's look out there at the precipitation for the month of, sorry about that. Let me go back to the latest run. There you go. Let me show you the precipitation forecast for all of September. And that's what it looks like. And I'm going, okay. I hate to be a jerk about it. I'm like, whatever you show, I have no confidence. I'm only concerned about this and this. Is there actually a signal that we could get the Gulf going in September to be delivering systems? That would make all of this wrong. You wouldn't have that if we had systems coming out of here. And do we really excite the northern plains, upper Midwest for another active go? And do we bring in the wetter weather, which would be consistent with La Nina in the Northwest? But I can't trust any of it right now. So we're going to look at another source, and that source would come from the Climate Prediction Center. They just released their newest 1-month outlook for September. They released this on the 21st, and they have got drier conditions anchored and hotter conditions anchored in the Intermountain West. They're trying to bring in some above average precipitation for the parts of the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, and they're wetter in the southeast. But this makes a lot of sense given that we know that between now and then there's going to be fronts parked down here. Big wild card is tropical systems here and here as we get further into the month of September. Now they're overall mild, and that's a good forecast based on historical precedents. I showed you this earlier in the month, right? We know, that September, October, November for the whole continental U.S. has had a warming trend for the last 45 to 50 years in fall. We're not getting the same type of trend in spring, but we are seeing it in fall. And we have a lot of attribution to that, to the very warm ocean temperatures in the North Pacific Ocean. But right now, I'd have to say that, forgive me there, I could make a lot of sense out of the CPC's forecast. But what I am curious about is what their newest forecast looks like from, I'm so sorry, I meant to click on this, the 3-month outlook. So let's look at their newest September, October, November precip. Let's open that link in a new tab, and let's look at their temperatures. Let's go and open that one in a new tab. So this is their precip outlook for September, October, November, and they are going drier here. And they've got really wet conditions over the southeast, maybe better chances for rainfall in the northwest. Temperature-wise, yeah, they're just mild for most of the country, but this is interesting. I'm looking at these live with you. I just pulled it up right before we started recording. I'm like, we'll just talk about it live. To see them going cooler, they're really going after this La Nina-like signal. That's what typically happens when there's a La Nina. We tend to just start in November driving in colder air. So I would say that this is probably later rather than earlier, but something to watch. But again, there's that heat in the Great Basin. Let's go beyond that. Let's just jump down to November, December, January. Open up the temperatures here and then the precip. All right, so this is the November, December, January. Yeah, you start to see this. While much milder conditions hanging on through late fall, early winter. And, oh yeah, I could have told you they were going to do that. Classic La Nina. Keep it dry south of that line. Keep it wet here and wet there. They get a highly variable jet. The dives in, exits. Have you seen me draw that before? I've been doing these videos since 2014. You probably see me draw every La Nina go of it. Looks like this in the models. I'm not surprised about that at all. Why not go to the heart of winter? Let's go January, February, March. And let's open both of these. Yep, I'm not surprised here at all. Cold. Chances of cold air coming through, mild south, and even maybe up the east coast. And precip, there it is. That is the most classic La Nina. No or weak subtropical flow. That's why there's drier there. Probably drier through Texas, drier in the southeast. And then highly variable jet that comes in and dives. So I am not surprised at all by this forecast. And it is very much saturated with La Nina-like pattern. And I'm going to ask you to all just be very skeptical of it. Now, this is not throwing NOAA under the bus. They're using their statistical forecasting engine to produce this, and every model you're going to find is going to do something. I mean, look, how about we just go have a look? European model, Weather Bell, good site here. Let's go to maps, seasonal forecast. You ready? No, I don't want ocean. I want precip, seasonal. Here is December, January, February. See it? Drier, drier, drier. Jet comes in, jet goes out. I mean, they've got it too, and I'm going to go ahead and make a stab to say the NMME, probably out there. What would that be, season 4? Yeah, look what they've got. Drier, 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 jet dives, jet leaves. And don't put any stock into it yet. Every La Nina has a different flavor. We had a La Nina last winter. It didn't look anything like this. We built in drought last winter into this area. Snow drought. Remember that? Well, our snow was down here. These guys didn't go into drought, but that's historical precedence, which is what we're going to think about. So in the same vein, I've got to call out this map. This is the forecast from now through September 6th to October 6th, which is capturing the early planting windows in Brazil. And they have consistently been wetter in this area. This is the same forecast model that couldn't get our forecast even anywhere close to being right across North America for the last month and a half. I'm honestly, we can go back farther than that. Let's call it the last 4 months. So sorry if I'm a little bit jaded by them, but they've been wrong. And therefore, what we're having to lean on is our own expertise. And that is important. And I love doing that. But it's always nicer when the models line up with your expertise. And so here's what I'm going to tell you to watch. What drives the monsoon is high pressure here. Big area of high pressure. And if that flow comes around early, then we're in good shape. If the flow goes farther to the north and draws in this dry air, this monsoon does not happen. Or if the high slides in closer to, this is Minas Gerais, I don't know how to say it. But if it slides over here or over toward Bahia, then we tend to push all the moisture over to the rainforest, and it tends to get drier. So we need to watch pressure patterns carefully. The Bermuda high in the North Atlantic, the South American high in the South Atlantic, and then off the West Coast, the Pacific high's position and what it could possibly do to any sort of recurving typhoon in the next 45 to 60 days. Boy, there's a lot to watch change here. So I'm going to leave it at that, and you know what we're going to be watching for the weekend to see how this pattern plays out going into next week. The wet possible conditions when we get into the southern plains and how things will shape up both in the tropics and with the drier conditions in the Midwest. Cool there and heat west. So that's it. Have a good one. Thanks.